The portal's inquiry is about the future and where and how it appears. Central to this inquiry about the future is the discovery of what is emerging now. Today we are in conversation with Grace Boda and Jeff Vander Clute, and we are seeking to explore what is emerging and what is inserting itself into our inquiries. And how are we being rewired to become agents of this emergent wisdom? Inside this, our specific focus is on the 3 books coming through you, Jeff, these last few months, including your work on Beyond Every Teaching. Grace, Jeff, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aviv. Great to be here.
Well, so to warm us up and create the ecology for today, let us do a first round of what is emerging now for you. And then we will bring the focus to every teaching, beyond every teaching. Do you feel ready to offer anything, Grace?
Sure. Just as you asked that question, what comes to me and what has been emerging so much in the last month or so is enhanced subtle perception of the movements of bringing things into form or having things come and take form through the energetics of embodiment, making itself very clear to me.
Please, Jeff.
I was letting that one sink in. Embodiment is definitely a theme for this year. And the 2 themes that are coming up for me in this moment are getting real, that this is a year so far. It's very clear that this is a year of getting real. And previous years have involved a certain measure of reality as well, of course. Somehow, it's time to really focus on what's real for us. Not maybe an abstract definition of reality, although we can certainly go there. And in my experience with individuals and organizations, this process of getting real relates to getting grounded, being established in the present moment, being in our bodies, being aware of what's happening on multiple levels of reality. And it seems to be the case that as a result of becoming very present and very real, there's an acceleration of evolution that's occurring. There's a greater coherence, and so there's less internal Brownian motion, you could say, and more of a directed movement of the whole that's actually going places. And where I've initially felt that something might be on tap for March, suddenly it's now, as an example from yesterday, a conversation with an organization. So I'm very interested to see, given that it's only January, what this acceleration of evolution might look like in June, in September, in December. Hopefully we can have a recap at the end of the year.
So getting internally tethered and fully attuned and more fully embodied in the subtle sense, and getting real and potentially getting realized inside it. So a very interesting 2 themes. I always am asking what's emerging in January because I have this stock market awareness. The smart or the experienced traders, they look to see what occurs in the first week or 2 of the beginning of a year, because there is the belief that that institutional organizations are making their allocations for the year, and the idea is that there is a fractal that begins in the year that then indicates something for the rest of the year. So many years ago I said, let's just not just leave this in relation to the stock market, let's recognize that we have the entire January and maybe the first 6 weeks into early February to sense into what is emerging and what is arising. And indeed, a year is something we create in our minds, but is there something in there that offers guidance? So I'm just coming out of an event that happened this weekend where we worked with the large global community that we've been on a journey with. And what emerged towards this event was a long-form writing, actually 12-page document, centered on one idea of lifting the word appraisal from a pedestrian context into the broader idea, the greater idea of self-inquiry, self-appraisal, self-inquiry, as a broader potential inside the cosmology of development work. And what I want is, I actually want to bring on screen one paragraph from the very beginning of the document, from the introduction. And before I do that, I want to swiftly review some of the development dimensions that we are aware of, and then put this paragraph as the seventh invisible dimension, and we will realize that it relates directly to what Grace just offered, and in some way is part of what you are proposing, Jeff, in the idea of get real. So we didn't coordinate this, which is the beauty of this situation, and we're simply discovering live. So let me bring this on screen. Okay. So, development dimensions. All right. There's all sorts of ways to talk about development dimensions. And what presented itself this morning, when I was assembling this, was, okay, we're all familiar with the idea of develop your character, develop your virtues. So we have, that goes all the way back to the Enlightenment and founding fathers and Benjamin Franklin. And you can choose to work on your courage and your patience and your compassion and integrate confidence and vulnerability and make those features of your character. All sorts of ways to work on that. There is skill and practice development. We can choose to build listening skills, healing modalities, facilitative practices, a whole range in all sorts of spaces. And then in some cases, certain skills and practices, they really nudge us into the bigger domain or stream that they come out of. So there is what I call domain development. Okay, so if you are in the space of music, you may develop the skills and you're very skillful with a piano or with a violin, but then you may develop specific interest in a particular time in music or in jazz or in any other genre. So there is a specific association with a domain. And the idea of domain development is when you shift beyond the skill or the modality or the practice, and you let the domain develop you and begin to work through you. Same as you work with somatic tuning and somatic awareness. Okay, so you may develop certain skills in the healing space, and then at a point you may say, I actually feel, I recognize that I am now becoming more of an active wire for the domain of healing. It begins to work through me. Same with the domain of facilitation, various domains of teaching, and so on. And naturally, there is shadow illumination development. So in this dimension of development, we will often talk about metabolizing the growth potential of shadow and trauma release, and how we unlock the latent potential in those experiences so they release in us new growth and development potential. And then there is what is often addressed in a variety of developmental models, the idea of perspective development. So one can develop second, third, fourth, fifth perspective along a greater and growing range. So second perspective is when I can appreciate a point of view that Jeff will articulate. The third perspective is when I can appreciate how Grace is appreciating or perceiving Jeff's point of view. Fourth perspective is when I can watch the three of us from above and see the emergent dynamic between the three of us. Fifth perspective will be when I can contain and embrace all that inside an even greater perspective. And there is also a sixth perspective when that can be even embraced inside potentially a larger universal context. And then the development work there is not just to develop these capacities, but to discover and unlock the compassion of expanding the range. So this is where virtue, and skill, and domain, and perspective, these are interpenetrating domains. They will permeate each other. And this morning I said, well, let's also include here purpose tethering development, which is more to do with the attunement to the inner lives, the self-tethering, the self-authoring, integration of the capacity to, I feel this quite a bit in the way that, Grace, you describe the sense of embodiment. But the whole point for me of bringing all this on a slide was to say the paragraph I'm about to bring up, which was part of the introduction to the work of self-inquiry as part of the broader prospect of self-appraisal inside a developmental context, is essentially sensing into the invisible dimension that is not fully articulated in any of these 6 dimensions of development, and I'm proposing is emergent inside and through all of them. And my intuition was it will be very useful to sense that for a moment and then let you play jazz with it, also as a platforming for what we will then read from Jeff. So here is the paragraph that I wanted to share. It simply says the following: true self-inquiry appraisal, it should say, or true inquiry or true self-inquiry appraisal process, is a form of self-update where we allow ourselves to be rewired and transformed in the interior cosmology that we recognize as the invisible shape of our awareness and consciousness. As we integrate new awareness, new sentiments, new perceptions, new realizations, the interior shape of our awareness space quivers and re-architects itself. Then, as we follow these threads of discovery and connection, it can be a delicately subtle and raw experience that may feel stretching, disorienting, and uncertain as a whole new configuration begins to birth inside. The essence of what emerged here, which I felt as this writing was coming through, and this came early in the introduction, was sensing into self-inquiry and sensing into development beyond words, beyond concepts. Often we, like right now, I'm using words, using concepts. But the experiential awareness of how, in my journey, the moments when I felt that I was breaking open for something completely new. And perhaps words and concepts appeared with it, but actually the words and the concepts were not always the first principle at all. They were the first accompaniment or the second accompaniment and cloak or clothing of something that was arising. I remember 30-some years ago, I was teaching with a group, and in the middle of a lesson that I was grappling with because I felt that there was a potential that I never fully unlocked about that insight. And something in me was desperately looking to unlock an insight I felt was there. And then mid-lesson, mid-session, mid-discovery, something in me shifted physically and energetically. And I found that I stood differently. I became more erect. Something actually energetically got unlocked in my spine and changed my energetic posture and configuration that also obviously manifested physically. So we're in a time where so many people use so many words, and what I felt I wanted to be expressed through that is the realization that there is literally, actually, and for those people that are trained to see it, they can see it, but it perhaps not even always seen by those that can see, because we're talking about very subtle luminescent realms, where to embrace a new perspective is not an intellectual, conceptual process. I am literally growing and expanding the space that I occupy, that you occupy, that we occupy. The realization of that, the recognition of that, the permission to sense that. That's all I wanted to bring, because it felt live in the moment. So that is part of what's emerging with me. I'd invite you to play jazz with that as an inroad to whatever we may explore next with some writings from Jeff, please.
Aviv, I would love to jump in on that. When I was talking about, and you saw me, so you can sense the energetic reality that I'm bringing forward when I say what's coming in for me in the beginning of the year is greater and greater subtle perception of the blueprint of what's emerging through anything. It's so, of course, literally in the container that I hold with organizations that I work with, this is what they're doing. They'll hire me to do strategic planning, but they won't say, what are our goals and milestones and what do we do in the future? They ask the questions we asked each other. Are we ready? Are we real? Who are we right now? How do we find inside what we have always been exactly the thing that's emerging now? So they're not asking, you know, I've spent so much time dedicating myself in training about different kinds of development. And what I'm learning is that framework, at least in, you know, what I'm doing, what's working, who's working with me and what's emerging in the world that I'm sensing around me is kind of a softening of the idea of development into a just inward turn of not becoming anything, but of finding what has always been here, which of course illuminates, as you said, the shadow elements and the hard identities. And but even, you know, senior leaders in big university systems, some of the stodgiest, most bureaucratic systems that there are getting together and letting go of those stiff identities and plans and strategies and just saying, okay, the world is new. Who are we? You know, what's the truth of what we've always been? And are we ready? Can we be real in this moment? I'm seeing more and more of that. So I'm loving the way you articulated it. It mirrors and echoes what I'm seeing in individuals and in organizations as well.
Well, I really appreciate and applaud all that has been shared and all that has been said, and listening for what to add to the already rich field. And what comes to me is the perspectives, the multiple perspectives that we can inhabit, that we can play with. And as we release the strong identities and that impulse to identify, which in some ways makes us much smaller than we actually are, our capacities naturally expand. And so, like you were saying, Grace, maybe we don't have to work as hard to develop skills and competency. There's a place for that, of course. And now we're at a time when we can explore what is naturally available, the natural perfection, the great perfection of life. And I feel in this relaxing and settling into life as it is now, that we're learning to trust also that there is an inherent underlying intrinsic goodness that is trying to express and is expressing when we don't fight it or get in the way out of fear, which is also connected with identities and protecting some sense of who we are, maybe so we can look good or feel worthy. All of those ultimately shadow dynamics are coming up in a gentle way. I know perhaps prior versions of personal development and transformation have been forceful. And maybe that force was necessary to break through the shell of something. And now maybe not so much. The shell is naturally softening, becoming permeable to the light, to the spirit, to the energy that we are already. So we can play with this in a much more fun way. It's actually play. Before it was work, seemingly. Now it's maybe I could say it's a year of greater playfulness. And I see this trend continuing beyond 2023.
More effortlessness. And the balance of effort and grace is such that the effort I'm seeing people making, it's simply the effort of willingness, and then the deep inquiry of, anything that might be obstructing my full willingness, my full yes to receive what comes through. I keep doing this, because I'm sensing it energetically, but comes through this center, the absolute truth of what an organization or an individual is bringing through. And so it's such a relief for people to learn, I don't have to really work and try so hard. My natural capacities will shine in radiance when I'm fully willing, when my yes is complete. But within that willingness is everything Aviv spoke to, all the capacities, all the willingness to be able to hold multiplicity, to hold uncertainty, to remain present in change. So there are lots of edges to that willingness that get explored in the kind of inquiry work Aviv was talking about. But the real effort is, yes, I'm willing.
So with this idea of effortlessness and relaxing into possibility and letting life do the work, as you say, Jeff, it is a natural segue to ask you about the story of Beyond Every Teaching. And first, how did this come about? You started to source and translate, I don't know if you use this word, but we're going to find out in a minute, these three books concurrently. In other words, what is the origin story of the work?
Thank you for inviting the backstory. And there is a story, actually, letting it percolate. Let's see. Well, the name, the title, Beyond Every Teaching, came 6 years ago. That was the first piece. First came the title. And with that, a sense that beyond teaching is transmission. We can define words and phrases, especially in spirituality, in lots of different ways. So I'm just giving you my perspective. And what was coming to me was an appreciation that words can be vehicles for transmission, and I would say direct transmission. So they seem to be intermediaries, and yet somehow they actually are, in a non-dual sense. The words, the language, the communication is the source, the origin. And well, I just have to say this seems to fly in the face of the very beginning of the Tao Te Ching. And I don't mean to contradict anyone or anything, but the opening to the Tao Te Ching says basically the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. In other words, as I interpret that, if you can put it in words, somehow that's not it. And something in me says, well, that's true up to a point. On a 10-rung ladder of realization of the Supreme, that calibrates at, it's a real-time calibration, 8.6. So it's really, really true relative to a lot of other stuff. But somehow, if we go further, the discourse is the source, which is one of the transmissions in Beyond Every Teaching. And so I had to let that sit for a while. I had to let that sit for about 5 years, in fact. And it was early last year, beginning of 2022, when I was writing down various ideas, let's say, more than ideas and more than concepts, because they came with a kind of energy and power, which is the transmission. And I was just getting them down in a spreadsheet, curiously enough, because I find it's easier to organize ideas in spreadsheets rather than just free-form text. And so a point was reached in about March of 2022 when the spreadsheet was really big, and I was starting to put the transmissions into a verbal form that started with paragraphs. And then I realized, looking at them long enough, because this process was hours, hundreds of hours actually, that they wanted to be shaped like poems. I'm reluctant to call the transmissions poems. Maybe it's appropriate to say poetic transmissions, because primarily they are transmissions. And so once there was about 60 pages of transmissions, I saw, well, gosh, this is half a book. And so I remembered at that point, Beyond Every Teaching, I had registered the domain back in 2017 for the first time. And then after a couple of years of not using it, I let it go. The domain is long enough that nobody else had the idea to register it. So last March, I re-registered beyondeveryteaching.com, and that felt good. And what was 60 pages has now become 150 pages. And this is if you print out from the website. So all of the writing so far is live on the web. And this has been an important feature of the process, writing in public. Going way back actually to December or so of 2021, I had the sense, just put it out there. Yeah, it's rough. And believe me, the early drafts were rough. And even the drafts that are online now are still evolving, still being potentized and polished. Nevertheless, there was some sense this is a spiritual practice that has value at every step of the way, not only for the author, who seems to be me, and yet it's coming from other levels of being as well. So it's a kind of partnership with life, a partnership with totality that is the author. And this value is also for the reader. So people would say to me, even when I felt like, gosh, this really needs work, people would say, oh, that insight or that particular transmission unlocked something in me, liberated something in me. That's the point. So the transmissions, whatever state they're in, are activations. They are seeds or sparks of realization that go to work in one system, especially when there's a ripeness. And now I'll diverge for a moment and say Ramana Maharshi had a sense that there were three types of people who would come to him. Ramana Maharshi was a great sage in South India in the 20th century. There were people who were like gunpowder, and they were ready to be ignited. The tiniest spark was all that was required, and boom, enlightenment. And then there are people, he's not alive now, but I think the model still applies, who are like firewood that might be a little damp. So put some kindling in the fireplace and that wood will burn. It won't take very long. But it takes some work. And then there are people who are like bamboo. And I gather that bamboo has a lot of moisture. That's why it grows in tropical areas. And so it's harder to burn, and maybe it won't burn. I think that was the point, actually. The bamboo's not going to burn. So don't work so hard to make something happen that isn't ready to happen. Now, with Beyond Every Teaching, I've had a sense that these sparks want to be mini suns. They want to be so hot and incandescent that even bamboo will ignite. Now, it remains to be seen how effective these transmissions will be in the wild. Although they're live on the website, unless somebody knows to go to the website, they won't find them because there's been no publicity yet. So that's a book, Beyond Every Teaching. One book that was arising now is arising since about a year ago, two others popped up last summer. And I knew one of them was coming, and that book is called Definitions, Foundational Understandings for an Awakened Humanity, which admittedly is kind of a lofty title. That is the purpose of this work. It is about awakening, and it is about collective awakening. It is about awakening for the species so that we live in harmony with ourselves, with all of life, with the planet, realized in oneness such that we know we are the planet. And it has been said, whatever we do to the web of life, we do to ourselves. Chief Seattle. So this wisdom's been around a long time from all kinds of traditions, indigenous traditions, non-dual traditions, dualistic traditions. They're all converging on this recognition of our oneness. So beyond every teaching is clearly on that path. Definition supports the realization of oneness by sourcing the meaning of words and phrases that we use in spirituality and science from such a deep place that it is, you could say, the meaning or the definition according to source. So this doesn't deny other definitions and other levels of meaning making and interpretation, but these are the root meanings, you could say, of words and phrases. And in the roots, the oneness is very clear. And so there's the possibility of harmonizing and reversing the Babel effect. So harmonizing human consciousness by working very methodically and profoundly with words, actually, with language. So when somebody says to me, well, we can't quite get there with words, it's fine. I accept that it's challenging, but I don't fully buy that. I get that if we drop into the roots and actually become source, be the source, and be the expression of source. And this is not new in the Bible. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, both. So what are the words? What are the expressions that we can make from such a deep place that they arise as a flowering, and we're no longer arguing over what we mean when we speak to one another? And my sense is we will transcend the level of communication where the Babel effect is possible. And somehow the book of definitions is supporting that. It's a step. Ideally, definitions puts itself out of business. We don't need it anymore. But we're in this transitional period where the invitation is to go really deep in our understandings of who we are, what is real, what is true, and how we communicate all of this. And the communication is happening all the time. So it's really about becoming conscious in our communication. And so completely transparent that it happens without hearing againstness, without a kind of resistance, which is another topic. But there's a third book I want to talk about, which is called The Ontology of Unicity. And the ontology, for short, is really about being and how being comes to be. And in many traditions, I can think of a few that have 7 planes of consciousness as a way of understanding the evolution of the human soul on its journey back to oneness. And so the ontology is a bit like that. It has organized itself into 2 domains, principally, one being the supreme foundation and the other being supreme mind. I don't want to go too esoteric, but if we think of mind as sort of the context within which creation happens or seems to happen, within which there is the dynamism of thought, and universes are formed and experienced and dissolved eventually, but all simultaneously as well. So that would be mind. Prior to mind is the foundation, and beyond mind. It's really important to know that there is beyond mind, not just human mind, but the big mind that is all minds. And there we find, you could say, the spiritual heart, for example, the really deep place, which is immediacy, intimacy with what is. And so all of this really weaves together. I think of the 3 books actually as 3 trees. And the ontology is the tree of structure. So I'm really studying the different levels of the roots of things and how deep the roots are. And so there's 50 pages of calibrations of everything I've imagined so far. And it's it's not very book-like. There's an introduction, but the calibrations are a bit more of like a science reference. And one of the intentions is science and spirituality come together because they are one. And that will be a great healing in human consciousness. So we have the book of structure, which is the ontology. Then we have the book of meaning, which is definitions. And then beyond every teaching is the book of transmission. So this is a lot of backstory. And now we can understand a bit more what beyond every teaching is.
In the spiritual practice you're describing of doing this live and publishing it as you go along, strikes me that has these two dimensions. You being prepared to act in that transparent capacity. So you're sharing mid-flight what is arising, and there is in that the readiness to say, well, here, this is where it is today. I reserve the right to update it tomorrow, next week, the week after. And there is a transmission and a teaching. And the second dimension of that, beyond that personal practice, is that you're making it a communal experience, a communal transformative experience. You writing in public for people that are following your work, that in itself is something that would not be possible 30 years ago before we shared electronically. So I see this to be a change of strategy, a change of modality, a change of practice that in some way is integrated, inherent inside the very nature of what it is you're describing.
And I would say that the process has sanded away any perfectionism, because had I waited until any of the currently 55 transmissions was perfect, we'd be waiting a long wait. There'd be nothing on the website. And so there would have been no opportunity for feedback, which has come at various times and been very helpful. It's great to hear in real time when somebody resonates with something. And other aspects, I suppose, I mean, there are a lot of aspects. For me, the writing process begins with meditation, with sourcing, which is a deep inner listening into the roots of being. And in meditation, oftentimes I'll have a flash of something come in, and that might be the end of the meditation, because now it's time to go put it into a transmission and share it immediately. I've discovered that when the feedback loop of receiving and sharing out is very, very tight, like basically it's immediate, then the incoming transmission becomes continuous. It comes in continuously, it goes out continuously. So there's something about this way of writing which has emphasized the continuous flow nature of creativity. Yeah, and it's humbling as well. It's humbling to look back at something that's been live for a month and realize there's a typo that's relatively trivial. In other cases, recognize that something just wasn't sufficiently lucid now. And so I've had the experience of witnessing, I'll say, my own growth and growing clarity and lucidity by seeing like the past benchmark from maybe last week and realizing I've gone way beyond that. So this is, it's a creative process. It's also a spiritual practice of becoming clear and awake. And it is much like a ratcheting. So I've got something out there, it's live, it matters, it's not hidden. And as soon as there's a way to make it better, of course, I'm naturally going to do that, in part as an act of service, because once the transmission is more lucid, it's more powerful and more transformative and beneficial for whoever might happen upon it.
Well, so I actually feel ready to have the first reading, if that's all right. Where would you want to start? With what?
Well, I'd love to start. Oh, yeah, with the proper use of power. So it's funny to have a title like Beyond Every Teaching and then say something like, well, one of the key teachings that seems to be coming through me, but I will, because paradox is essential. We love paradox. Yeah, I really get that. So there's something in my dharma about power and how to use power well, the right use of power. And I just want to say one last bit of preamble. Lord Acton in 1832, I believe, said, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that is a very dim view of power. True power is love. Love and power are ultimately synonymous. They're distinctions, of course, but they go together. And Martin Luther King made that point very clearly. So the proper use of power.
Now, I'm ready to bring it on screen while you read this. Would that be appropriate?
Sure. Yeah. Then it's one of those sing-alongs.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you feel? Do you feel that? Because I intuit that there is a different absorption when we see the words while you read. Shall we do that?
Yeah. Let's give people the option. So anyone is welcome to close your eyes and just listen, or open your eyes and listen and read simultaneously. It's up to you. True power is inexhaustible. Omnipotence never runs dry, never runs down, never fails to crack open the seeds of life and pour into creation. Real power is only fierce when beings are resistant to the gentlest and subtlest modalities of transformation. Great power is never wanton. Absolute power is absolutely dedicated to the gentle way of amplifying illumination. The foundation of power is the ultimate coherence of yes without an opposite. In the absence of negation, power radiates luminosity, enlightens consciousness, and energizes all modes that harmonize hearts and synthesize minds. Sourcing sources power from the reservoir of you. It is power that is projected through the idea of source into the idea of free space as the notion of creation. All that you conceive, all that you enliven with divine breath. Power is the force of pure generativity and the will to create that dwells in the root of your undenied truth and upwells within you. All power is inside of you, and all power can only be you. Energy is the moving power of you. Matter is the confined power of you. Light is the primordial potency of you. Your profound agency is pristine power. Conditions do not constrain your power. It is your power that creates conditions. You know the true nature of power because your nature is power. You emanate pure power, and your power clarifies the true power of you through all that you create and recreate and finally uncreate. It is you who directs expressions of power through the operation of your omnipotent will, through focus, command, clarity, and requirement, all conjoined with love in supreme service. Mastery is mastery of the use of power. That which you are is the master of power. Know the power of truth, know the power of peace, and you are the master, the supreme master, wielding the power of divinity to create. The peaceful creation of flourishing diversity, perpetually harmonizing, perpetually rhapsodizing in infinite love and bliss. Supremely contented, supremely fulfilled, supremely complete, so shall it eternally be. So this was edited just a couple of days ago, and I actually skipped ahead to revise this one. Something in me said, do this now. And then I realized, oh, it was for our call today. So when we're listening, the signs are everywhere and all the time. That's that continuous flow I was talking about. And today is a very auspicious opportunity. I've never read this transmission out loud. I've never read most of them out loud. So this is an opportunity to share the transmission. What it will look like next week, maybe it will look a little different. We know now it's an evolutionary process. Hopefully, there's a greater softness around our ideas of power for those of you who have listened and received this transmission. Our fear of power does more damage than the power itself, I would say. That just came to me. We can kick the tires and see if it's true, but my sense is it's our fear that is problematic, not power. So may we use power in a right way, in an aligned way, which is life expressing itself. Then we are life. Can't go wrong.
Grace, anything in you to speak to this from Jeff right here?
Taking it in. I read it this morning. I know it's a recent transmission. I read it this morning, but hearing the words, I'm taking in that transmission more deeply. Thank you, Jeff. There are I just marked a couple of places that really just sung to me that I want to call forward. Relative to what we were saying earlier, the foundation of power is the ultimate coherence of yes without an opposite. That's that willingness, the full yes that releases every denial of who and what we are. Power, in the absence of negation, power radiates luminosity, enlightens consciousness, and energizes all modes that harmonize hearts and synthesize minds. I love that. One more short piece that I underlined that just really sang to me. Power is the force of pure generativity and the will to create that dwells in the root of your undenied truth. When I speak about power with clients, organizational leaders who come to me, they often are struggling, like you're saying, there's a fear of power in some people, of exercising power, not wanting to do it badly. And then there is sometimes an overuse of a certain kind of dominating use of power that comes from fear. So all of that is driven by the fear of a deeply identified separate self. But what I hear at this, in the root, I can feel that. Can we feel that in our bodies, in the very root of your undenied truth? That just vibrates up my spine in the most powerful way. Yes, I wanted to highlight that part. These are just powerful, powerful words, Jeff. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Grace. So, Jeff, what Grace is demonstrating is that specific segments here could be taken as a koan or as a meditative way of being. And for me, that was also the first thing that stopped me, right? Yes, the ultimate coherence of yes without an opposite. So somebody can actually stay with this phrase. And as I was mapping earlier, if you stay with that, there is an unlocking power that will change the cosmology of your awareness and will reconfigure you on the inside. Oh, so there is a place where there can be an ultimate coherence of yes without an opposite, right? Because in the mundane or the day-to-day consciousness, we mostly know of yes in nearness to now. We mostly know of opposites. So you are, okay, so fair enough. So non-duality as a teaching has been here for a long time, but you are in a way summoning and inviting here the access to that through this transmission. And my question to you is actually more about the process. So something like this, would it be a slow coming drip, or will it be a burst that writing itself quickly? And question one and question two, what is it you're experiencing on the inside when you write something like this, if you can try to describe the experiential dimension of this?
Early in the process, the transmissions came like, well, freight train is the phrase that comes to me, with a lot of energy, a lot of power, a kind of insistence that I couldn't say no to. Maybe technically I could have been in great resistance and said, no, I don't want to write. That wasn't the case. I was very open to wisdom flowing in. And the experience was, don't worry so much about getting it right. Get it down such that it resonates, that it calibrates for truth. And this actually brings up a really interesting observation that came to me just about a month ago, which is that the writing process has had 3 distinct stages that correspond one-to-one with some of the teachings of Sri Aurobindo about the true, the good, and the beautiful. So the first stage was get ideas down such that they're true, that they calibrate highly for truth. And it's worth saying that they became more true over time as I worked with them more, but get it down. The second stage, which happened or began maybe September-ish of last year, was about the good. So the early versions of what I called the statements at that time, the transmissions, were quite pointy in many instances, very direct. And I love direct instructions, pith instructions that just like go right in to the cerebral cortex or what have you. And it's worth noting that we humans tend to be fairly identified with our spiritual beliefs, especially spiritual beliefs. And so direct statements that poke at those could be triggering. And it is not my intention to be triggering here or anywhere. So there was the possibility to work with the statements, work with the transmission such that they became softer, gentler. And a knowingness descended that, and it relates to power. The greatest power is also the gentlest. So the transmissions, they can't possibly be complete if there isn't a gentle energy. They can be direct, and there has to be a gentleness so that they can be received. A spoonful of sugar, you could say, makes the transmission go down. The third stage is beauty. And something very interesting happened since I've been here in Crestone, Colorado for a 2-month writing retreat. At the very beginning, the transmissions, which look like poems on the page, started to shape themselves such that the line endings formed wave shapes. So the last word of the preceding line and the last word of the current line, they're pretty close in terms of where they end. And then there's a natural waviness as some lines tend to expand and some lines tend to shrink. And I knew that the transmissions could not be complete if they didn't exhibit this wave-like pattern, which to the eye is actually rather pleasing, if I do say so myself. So true, good, beautiful. Can they be even more true, even more good, even more beautiful? Sure, it's going to be an ever-flowering process. My sense is the day that I stop working on Beyond Every Teaching is the day that, in some sense, it dies. So there may be a first edition, a second edition. I reserve the right to keep editing.
Yeah, beautiful. And that description of the wave goes back to where I started in this conversation, the sense of that there is a shape. So there is the shape of the words and the shape of the form of the words on the page, and there is the shape of the energetic nature of the transmission. In some cases, it may take the shape of a wave. In some other cases, it may be straight lines, or it may appear in a chalice form. I don't know. There can be a variety of different forms. So I'm ready for the next reading. What is the next piece you want yourself or Grace to read?
I'd love to invite Grace to choose, and I don't even know which one it will be.
You know, as you both know, but others may not know, I did not choose this in advance. This is spontaneous, but I have printed out for myself here a couple of my favorites. So I would love to read Blossoms of Enlightenment. This one really calls to me, as they all do. Aviv, do you feel the desire to put it up on the screen, or?
I probably need the link for that.
It's in the same part of his book.
So hold it there for a minute. Jeff will
Thank you, Aviv. From Jeff, Blossoms of Enlightenment. Holy enlightenment is knowing and living the unseen ways of true agency. Enlightenment is subtle, silent, and all-powerful. Enlightenment is readily recognized as a curious mastery of doing by non-doing and an effortlessness that accomplishes all. Sacred illumination is forever available in the hallowed now moment in openness, non-resistance, and still abiding. Allowing what is, one slips beneath the surface of form and discovers that which animates life and heals all hurts from deep within. The inner power of enlightenment is a hungry flame that burns every fictional identity to the ground and reduces to ashes all impulses to be someone or be something. All that remains when the fire is complete is presence, naturalness, and serenity. To understand the significance of enlightenment is to misunderstand that which the intellect is simply unable to grasp. The devouring conflagration that blazes completely through every last concept of the self immolates all limiting ideas and constructs of what is. What enlightenment is apprehended now, without any filters, in full immediacy, in transparency, uninterrupted by knowledge or perceptions. True illumination is a flowering of you, a blossoming of wisdom, a fountaining of living light that is forever bursting forth from your creative effulgence. Every petal on every flower in every field of existence is dwelling harmoniously without any requirement for mental understanding in the garden of luminosity that is your enlightened mind. You are that which is flowering. You are the power that flows silently through the vessels and chambers of life. And when, at last, the time to bloom is ripe, the whole of creation erupts in color, and you are in every blossom, and you are every blossom. You are the blossoming of holy enlightenment.
Thank you, Grace. This is the first time I've ever heard anyone else read one of these transmissions.
It works in me even as I speak it.
Yeah. So what is the experience you're having, Jeff, as you hear this through the speaking voice rather than the quiet reading voice? How is it? What is the quality that it takes now hearing it from outside of you, from Grace's voice?
I delight in the qualities of the human voice, the texture and the intonation. And Grace, I particularly delight in your voice. I know you're highly regarded for your meditations, and there's something that you transmit with your voice. So there's a beautiful pairing between you and your voice and the transmission and the intention of the transmission, which is to be a transmission. You're able to deliver it. And the experience I have is deep fulfillment. Something is completed in this process for this particular transmission. Something has happened that transcends the writing process and includes the delivery and the full circle. I want to say also, having received it this way, I now get 99.6% complete. So I can feel where the evolutionary potential still exists. And for the last transmission, which I read, I get 99.2%. So we're getting there. And it's easier to feel where there might be, it's like a bud of new growth that wants to occur, not just a correction or a change. When it's spoken, that energetic budding is more palpable.
So perhaps as sometime you would suggest and make proposals to me. I'm about to make a suggestion and a proposal to you. Perhaps when this is published, it wants to be published as is, as a book, but also as an audio book, and perhaps it needs either your voice or your two voices. So there is a masculine and a feminine voice, or a gathering of voices. I don't know, you will know, but perhaps there is that quality of transmission that is amplified through different voices.
Beautiful suggestion. My sense is it shall be so. And another dimension to add is visual. I have friends who are painters of consciousness, whose paintings are also transmissions, and there is an intention for the paintings to activate something within each individual who experiences them. That's a perfect pairing. And so I look forward to maybe not the first edition, which I sense will be a paperback, just very straightforward. When you put 150 pages of web text into a paperback, I think it'll be around 200 or so. But the second edition, maybe it can be a larger page format and glossy, so that we can have on facing pages art, paintings, high quality photographs of sculptures, so that this is a multimedia, multi-modality experience. And I don't know what it will look like. And also it probably has a place online forevermore, because you can link things in much more organically, and keep updating with each passing day. So it will continue to live and breathe.
My experience of both orations, both transmissions, it was to do with the energetics of the cascading nature of the reading and the intensity of the flow that has one nature and is attractive and compelling and creates a vortex that summons you to its inner conductivity. And then there is a part of me that nothing to do with the reading, but more in the way of being with this, would take a paragraph, or would take 3 lines and look for an abiding moment. Enlightenment is readily recognized as a curious mastery of doing by non-doing. I would pause there, because I need to experience the doing by non-doing and the doing of non-doing. So there are probably endless ways to internalize, to process, to be with, to abide with the potential of what this contains. Yeah, the inner power of enlightenment is a hungry flame that burns every fictional identity to the ground and reduces to ashes all impulses to be someone or be something. That contains something that invites you to stay with it before you move to the next line. And then you move to the next line. All that remains, and so on. So there are different ways of being with the potential, the fractal nature and the fractalizing nature of this.
Thank you. There are many different ways of being with it. So many I couldn't possibly count. I look forward. This is the feedback. This is the communal aspect of not only the writing process, but the sharing and the being with. Well, 2023 and beyond can be really good years for the ongoingness of this work. I've blocked out maybe isn't the word. I've opened up 2023 for the creative process and all the different dimensions and facets that may entail. So I'm in semi-seclusion in order to have 5.5 hours every day to meditate and source and write and revise. It does seem to be the case. This is another piece that I've learned, actually, that some measure of discipline is required, even though there's a lot of right brain sort of free form activity. Being available every day, reliably being available to life, to the field, to the universal intelligence, allows that to pour in. So I do wait for the inspiration in some sense, and there's a phrase, emergence with rigor. So there's emergence, to use the word that we brought in at the very, very beginning, and the emergence comes from profoundly deep. In the ontology, it is deeper than supreme mind. It's something so deep down in the foundation. It's not even a phenomenon. So emergence, yes, and in some ways it's so powerful and seemingly uncontrollable. It defies any mental constructs. But the rigor is kind of a piece that we can bring, the discipline, maybe a better word, the practice, the spiritual practice of it. And it's left brain and right brain together in harmony.
Well, and not to make your life more complex than it needs to be, and still, if you have musicians that are working with you, there is an exploration to how would you do the reading of this and integrate sometime music in the background with it and sometime in the pauses. And once you do that, there is the work you may be doing as you engage with groups and circles of people where that is released into its somatic discovery. So there is a movement, a sacred dance dimension that comes into it in whatever way or shape or form to enable either the expression of the idea and the form as it reveals itself into movement and shape and posture, both to express and to embody. So, as is the case, beyond every teaching, we'll offer many different ways of access. Now, is there one more final reading that you want to share today?
I had gotten, when I tuned in yesterday, that it might be appropriate to share one that is possibly a bit provocative, titled The Non-Existence of Ego. And I'll say no more.
I have that ready if you want.
Great. So if you'd like to share the screen, I'll share it in voice.
Yeah, let's have it.
In complete clarity, there is never ego. What is called ego is a misperception, a general confusion, a suffering delusion wherein that which is ultimately non-existent is reified into entityhood and then mightily defended. Unawakeness and unreality follow from even the least of beliefs and banishment from the divine origin and the foundations of the true creation. Yet you are that which is the most original, creative, and foundational. You do not frame the house of your life upon the sands of time or even upon the rock. You are the bedrock on which life is built. Ego does not exist as any kind of entity. What is labeled as ego is a transitory confusion that inevitably disappears in the pristine knowing that there is only one victorious existence. The vaster delusion of the ego complex is a belief in beings, one of many souls seeking to discover the keys to the gates of a heavenly paradise, yet this, too, evaporates. What one believes deeply beneath consciousness is outwardly projected, met, and experienced in surface awareness in order to be known and fully understood. Thus do experiences seem to substantiate by circular reasoning the absolute veracity of buried false beliefs. The small, meager one and the greater many, the island of the me and an ocean of we, are both aspects of a single belief in dividedness, which replays and revolves as a world spinning vigorously while going nowhere fast. The me is ego and the we is ego. Both are non-existing. What is real is the one, and this one is you, can only be you, the supreme, the creator, the source. It is only ever you who creates the operating system of beings and beingness within the supreme mind. The unenlightenment program is a low fidelity analog of God, yet does the human application offer clues to the radical truth of gladly incarnating divinity, as well as the propensity for endlessly looping thought patterns, emotional pain, and the sense of limitation and finitude. The dreams of smallness and finiteness are a distortion of infinite creation into a manifestation of infinite separation and immense egoicity. Yet the mathematics of living realization asserts that each one is the same as the totality. Without relying upon appearances, the practitioner of infinity knows the non-finite nature of everyone and everything. Bound to phantasmagoria, the peddler of baubles, charms, and trinkets would sell tokens of transfinitude to the already infinite one. To discover and perfect the knowing that nothing is ever finite, that smallness and separateness are optical illusions, that ego is a delusion, is the awakening practice and process of infinitization. Ego is thinking as if ego exists. Ego is attraction to ideas of ego. Ego is a fascination with one who has never been born. To appreciate the nectar of bona fide awakeness, know that the searching for spiritual illumination proceeds through states and octaves of unreality. The fictional attainment of becoming less small ends by transcending thoughts about ego. Paths out of ego, even if they be well-trodden and sincerely recommended, tend to reinforce the fundamental idea of what is not really there. The business of egocentrism is an unprofitable attempt to deny enlightenment. Every system of belief that involves the ego is a game of chance that cannot be won. Drop the pretense and observe well all that unravels and falls away. Accept upset and welcome the disruption that is the last gasp of the false. Upend apple carts and topple the tables of the ego's commerce. There is no way out of ego because there is no ego. Ultimately, it is realized that adherence to ideas of awakening from egoism extends the walk of suffering. There is no need to resolve ego. There is no need to understand or even heal the disease of ego. The only necessity is to know with unconquerable clarity the non-existence of ego. Abide in lasting clarity. Abide in the one reality as the one who is reality, who is the supreme reality and only the supreme reality.
So my guess is that when you wrote this, there was a riveting joy that was experienced inside it. That is the flaring of potentiating energy that I'm experiencing through this joy of the dispelling power of all that is false. There is tremendous joy of liberation inside that.
Yes, there was plenty of joy and also laughter.
Yeah.
The line about selling baubles and trinkets to the already infinite. That makes me chuckle, I have to admit.
That's my favorite line in there. I love it.
Yeah, there's so many compelling lines, right? The unenlightenment program is the low fidelity analog of God, right? Again, one could stay with this and go out with this for a walk or for a run or for a swim or for a practice in the gym, whatever.
This is also an example of polishing and making more gentle what initially was quite pointy. And I've had a practice of really listening for anywhere there could be a subtle or not so subtle againstness, or any kind of feeling like, hey, this is a point. This is a point to be made, to counteract or contradict other points that are out there. No. This is intended to be a pure delivery of love. And some of the ideas may be challenging. In the intro, which will be written probably in June, I will invite people to notice what resonates and not get too worked up about anything that doesn't resonate or is too challenging for an idea or belief that they may hold.
Right.
So again, this plenty of polishing on this one, with a little more to come.
The business of egocentrism is an unprofitable attempt to deny enlightenment. Right. They're just beautiful gems all along there is the whole of it, and then there are fractals inside it. Drop the pretense and observe well all that unravels and falls away. That is where there is this laser pointed brief that invites immediate embodiment, immediate actualization. Accept upset and welcome the disruption that is the last gasp of the false. Again, something to stay with, to be with, to reflect on, to seek to find the interior actuality. This is the interior reshaping and re-architecting when that is embraced. So what does it mean? One could say, when I welcome the disruption that is the last gasp of the false. How does it show up? What does it feel like? What would be a way to instantiate it? How would you live into this space between you and you? How would you live into this space between you and others? How would you live into this space in the relationship with all the various ecologies and environments around you? All of that is available to tap into and to discover in this. So I don't know how we end this call because nothing here is ending. This is all just one big starter and an invitation to discover more.
I would love to also just say, we've explored one of the 3 books here. The definitions book, I absolutely love. And so maybe some other time on some other call or some other instant, an exploration of those definitions. They really are an interconnected mycelial network of understanding, each one leading to another and each one deepening into the root of our being. They're not, I think what I want to say about that, to you, Jeff, I've never said this to you, just how deeply I appreciate that. They're not simply definitions in the sense of like, oh, now I understand what that word means intellectually. They are invitations deep into that network of, I see a mycelium in a rainforest, like it's so interconnected, but all of it takes you down different pathways that all lead back to the same foundational root. As you said before, it's really a powerful experience to be with those definitions.
And naturally, we will have all those links in the show notes, and people watching this on YouTube or anywhere else will be able to access it all. So what would you want to leave us with, Jeff, having made this very brief, really brief visit with this work that's coming through you?
Well, I can only end with extreme gratitude for both of you and for the opportunity to share. And I can also end with an invitation to anyone who might be encountering this conversation in any form to explore the website. BeyondEveryTeaching.com is a good place to go. And from there, you can link to the other books very easily. Also, your input and feedback is most welcome. Truly, truly, this is a participatory process, and the goal is profound liberation of consciousness and the potential of humanity to express in a way that is in full harmony with life. And we do this together. We do this all together.
Thank you very much for this and for what, I experienced a little bit like visiting in the Yellowstone of wisdom, where you have the geysers and the lakes and the fireworks of it all. So thank you very much for this special time and exploration with you. Along with our website at portalsofperception.org, Portals is also available on YouTube and on all podcast platforms, as well as social media. You can become an active member and join the conversation in community events. And you can help us get the word out by liking this content and by sharing it with your friends.